Our scripture reading comes from Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 to 23. I will be reading from the New International Version. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. The disciples came to him and asked, Why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop, yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Good morning. My name is Taylor. I'm one of the pastors here at Highrock. Today, we're continuing our series, Case Studies of the New Kingdom, where we explore the parables of Jesus, essentially case studies on how to live into Jesus' new kingdom. If you're not familiar with case studies, they're learning tools used in many academic and professional disciplines. Essentially, they're stories of real-world examples that a classroom gets to read about and place themselves in to determine what they might have done differently or to try and suss out what the lessons are from the example. They're common in law, medicine, emergency response, social sciences, business and engineering, even in seminaries. I actually use them in the course that I teach. They can be really useful in helping us to understand different perspectives and the principles of a real-world context without any real-world consequences. And yet, Jesus' version of case studies seem almost equally interested in helping us to understand as to not understand. Did you catch that bit in the middle of the text we just read where the disciples ask Jesus why he speaks in case studies or parables? It says, though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. I'm sorry, but what? What in the world? Is this the same Jesus who died for our sins, who so loved the world that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life, the one who leaves the 99 for the one, and yet he is purposely making it difficult for some people to understand his words? What in the world? How do we square this circle? Turns out this case study isn't as straightforward as we might want. In fact, as some of you know, one of my responsibilities here at Highrock is to manage the preaching schedule. And so I assign texts to our preachers. I really thought I'd be able to handle this one. No problem. Back when I was in seminary, I studied under one of the world's leading scholars on the parables of Jesus, Dr. Klein Snodgrass. Yes, that's his real name, who is a mentor to me. So I'll be honest, full of pride, I didn't even really think too much about this when I gave this text to myself. I figured I could handle any of them, no sweat. Then I went and read what Dr. Snodgrass wrote about this parable, only to discover to my abject horror that he refers to this parable as one of the most difficult of all of them to interpret. Oh no, I've made a huge mistake. As it turns out, wanting easy, quick answers to complicated truths, well, that's essentially what this parable is about. I feel personally attacked. I prefer when life is easy, when the answers are easy to find and even easier to implement. I know that hard work is rewarding and all that, but you know what's also nice? Easy work, or no work, simple answers to simple problems. Or how about, hear me out, no problems at all. Except that this parable presents a problem on a few levels. First, Jesus essentially says that within the crowd, lots of people will hear his message, but only some will understand it correctly. This feels like an ancient version of the whole blue gold dress fiasco from a few years ago, if you remember that on the internet. Honestly, this could describe so much of our modern reality, couldn't it? If you told me before smartphones and the internet would become ubiquitous, that once everyone could film everything and share it with everyone, that we'd still argue about reality, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But we all experience that as normal now. Someone records a newsworthy event, posts it online, and we all see the same video, and yet we filter it through our own preconceived lenses, typically our partisan political filter, and then come to opposite conclusions. People hearing and seeing the same message, yet coming to diametrically opposed conclusions. Often we begin to form our opinion before we've even gathered all the facts. We do this because we all want easy answers. And if something challenges our preconceived notions of what's true or causes us to have to engage in deeper reflection, well, that tends to be uncomfortable. So how often do we give into confirmation bias because in our heart of hearts, we don't want the truth as much as we want to be right, especially if the truth would require us to change something about ourselves. This is true in all sorts of areas of our lives. It doesn't have to be high stakes. You all know I'm a Seahawks fan, proudly. Some of you may remember way back in the 2012 season, the referees were on strike. And so there were a bunch of bench warmer refs getting their first NFL starts. Well, in what's now famously known as the Fail Mary pass, the Seahawks threw a pass to the end zone in the last couple of seconds of the game, and it was clearly intercepted. Yet the backup refs ruled it a touchdown for the Seahawks. The clock hit 0. We won the game. Now, if you asked most Seahawks fans at the time if the refs got the call right, they'd say 100%. And if you asked literally anyone else who watched the game, they'd tell you the opposite. Keep in mind, we have high-def slow-mo of this. Sometimes the answers we give reveal more about what we want than what's actually true. Sometimes when confronted with the truth, our response reveals more about our hearts than we'd like it to. Jesus knows this. It's why he uses parables as case studies. Yes, these case studies teach us about how to live as citizens in his kingdom while still living in this world, but they also teach us something about ourselves. They reveal as much about the world as they do about the world of our own hearts. In this parable, Jesus describes 4 different types of people who receive the words of truth, or in the parlance of the parable, a seed, and 4 very different outcomes from the same exact seed. The content and the capacity of the seed isn't the issue. Each seed has the same capability. The variable in this equation, it's the quality of the soil. In the first example, the seed accidentally or unintentionally falls not in the field, but along the path. And birds come quickly and eat the seed before it can put down roots and bear fruit. Now, Thankfully, as challenging as this parable is to interpret, and it is challenging, Jesus doesn't leave us hanging completely. In fact, it's one of the few parables that Jesus actually helps interpret for us, thankfully. So for this seed, Jesus explains that this is what happens when people hear the message of the kingdom, but don't understand it. He says the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. A hardened footpath between the rows of crops isn't made for growing crops. There's no desire to have a seed sown there. These are folks who don't want to hear the message of the kingdom. Their hearts are intentionally hardened. I think of the psalmist writing in Psalm 14, "Only fools say in their hearts, there is no God." I liken this to someone who is hardened against Jesus' message, who's almost willfully misunderstanding the gospel and accidentally hears a sermon or witnesses a Christian act of love. The interior and the exterior worlds match. So there's no openness or interest in true understanding. And so the enemy is easily able to snatch the seed off the surface because it was never going to get through the outer layer anyway. It's like trying to convince a tobacco lobbyist of the scientific research on the dangers of smoking. As Upton Sinclair famously said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. The problem isn't the message or the seed. It's the density of the soil. In the second example, though, there is a key difference. Now, the person represented here has a genuine, deep desire to know the truth. This is what Jesus says. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. They wanted to know the truth, as Jesus says. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with great joy. But since they have no root, they only last a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. While the first example may have been a little exaggerated or uncommon, this one is not. As a pastor, I've seen this kind of dynamic repeatedly. I see people who have a genuine encounter with Jesus for the first time, often through church or a Christian community. And so often they'll come up to me or another pastor and they'll want to make a big, bold statement to declare their faith and their love. Their response is real and it's joyful, but it isn't fully grounded in reality just yet. Often they want to get baptized or become a pastor or a missionary, or they tell me that after their first time attending church on a Sunday, they're going to be back every single Sunday. Look, I work here, and even I'm not here every Sunday. This is what I refer to as propose on the first date energy. When I hear people talk like this, I simply smile and nod, and I affirm their desire and their enthusiasm. And then I try to gently reframe things for them without squashing their hopefulness. I remind them that Jesus wants us to be in it for the long haul, and faith takes time to mature. But a slow, steady faith is no less genuine or transformative than an instantaneous change. In fact, it's far more likely to stick if it's slow and steadfast than a flash in the pan. I can't tell you how many people I've seen make these bold proclamations of faith, but then fade away quickly when the initial euphoria wears off. Authentic desire is wonderful. Jesus celebrates when our hearts deeply want to follow and be obedient. But here's the thing. When suffering comes, and it will inevitably come our way, that's when we face the true test of our mettle. In fact, Jesus himself tells us that we will face many trials and sorrows in this life as a result of following him. It's why he tells us to count the cost before we decide to follow him. Because it's not an if, but a when there's a cost. One of the biggest dangers to our faith is shallow roots. We can have genuine desire to follow Jesus when times are great, but it really isn't until things get challenging that we find out the true depth of our belief. It's sort of like a boat built for the ocean. Until it leaves the harbor, we can have all the theoretical confidence in its structural integrity that we want. But unless it experiences some real waves, who really knows? So do we go to God faithfully with our lament in times of trouble? Or do we fall away and forget that love that we first had? Now, this may sound counterintuitive given what we've just discussed, but suffering actually isn't the greatest danger to Christian faith. There's another threat to the faith that, in my experience, is far more insidious because it's stealthier. And it's what Jesus addresses in the third example. Jesus says this is the third category, is the other seed that fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, which he explains this way. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. Look, I don't know about you, but I spend a pretty good chunk of my time and energy in life trying to avoid, or at least trying to minimize, suffering or discomfort. I put a lot of focus on planning for the future to ensure that I'll have enough to be comfortable, whether it's enough time to complete my goals, enough mental bandwidth for the next task, or enough money to pay the bills for the next month. For me, I recognize that at times, I'm not just budgeting, which would be wise, but trying to grasp for more and more. Because at times I've believed the lie that more will make me finally feel like I have enough, and then I can rest easy. Yet in my experience, more is never enough. The truth is, I have my material needs met. And that wasn't true at every point in my life, but it is true today. And yet, there's still something inside of me that still wants to strive as if my circumstances haven't changed. We can come to a point when we have more than enough, and yet we keep striving. We keep persisting as if we're living in scarcity. And so we maintain the behaviors of famine while we have the resources to feast. We can spend so much of our time and effort trying to avoid suffering and pursuing the things of this world that, make us comfortable, often without realizing that our striving for more creature comforts might actually be an insidious threat to our faith. Friends, hear me when I say this. Adversity is just as likely as luxury to cause us to fall away and to forget the message of the kingdom. The worries of wealth and wanting more and more are just as likely, if not more likely, to cause us to lose our focus on Jesus precisely because they're so steady, so quiet, so pervasive, and frankly, so culturally acceptable. No one goes out in search of more challenge. And when we do find challenges, we often try to look for ways, around rather than through. Which is why when I realized my huge mistake in assigning myself this challenging text, I did briefly contemplate just quietly changing the schedule to give it to Dave, see if anyone noticed. Now, please don't mishear me on this. Money or wealth aren't inherently bad. In fact, that's one of the most frequently misquoted parts of the Bible. In 1 Timothy, it says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people, craving money, have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. There are plenty of examples of wealthy people in the scriptures who are deeply faithful. But let's also not rest on that and assume that because it's possible that we can or are doing the same with our resources. That's not a given. It would be naive to assume that money is powerless to change us. In fact, money is one of the most common topics that Jesus teaches on. He touches on it in almost half of his parables. We can start out with a genuine faith, and we can, like the seeds whose faith is choked out by the weeds, become so distracted by the worries, goals, and priorities of the world that we lose focus on Jesus and what he has planted us to do. So we become uprooted, and our faith withers away. Tragedy and adversity typically have a way of coming on in sudden, dramatic fashion. Yet the reason that comfort and luxury are so effective is that they're slow and steady. There's a quiet erosion to our faith that goes on with that. Now, the last group is unique. This is the example that we all ought to strive for. Jesus describes a type of soil that produces a crop. Here's what he says. Still, the other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100, 60, or 30 times what is sown. And this one, well, we don't really require all that much interpretation, but still, Jesus adds this. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop, yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what is sown. 30, 60, or 100-fold yield for a crop in the first century Near East would have been a phenomenal harvest. A typical crop yield in a good season would have been somewhere in the 6 to 7-fold range of what was planted. This is way beyond a normal good year. This would have been one for the history books if this were really to have happened. This is because those who hear the word and understand the message of the kingdom then do something about it and can produce an exponential growth curve in the kingdom. The fruit of the faithful more than makes up for the seeds that don't end up producing fruit. Now, there's one aspect of this parable that I've got to admit I've struggled with. It's not to deny anything that Jesus has said. I've seen the fruit of this reality plainly with my own eyes. I've seen people determined to reject the gospel. I've seen people start out with enthusiasm only to walk away when things like suffering come their way. I've seen people slowly lose their momentum and zeal for the kingdom as they gain wealth and status. And praise God, I've seen people hear and understand the message of the kingdom and produce incredible fruit. Fruit that more than offsets the loss of those who hear the word and either reject it or don't implement it. Yet, the part of this passage that's been so challenging for me is where Jesus seems to be fairly clear that in this parable that there are times that he is intentionally cryptic or vague. It's when the disciples ask, why do you speak in parables? He does say that it's not accidental. That was up until about a month ago, and it just finally clicked into place for me. As some of you know, I serve on our denomination's board, which handles the care and discipline of ministers who have either had a tragedy befall them and then they require care, or they've misstepped ethically or morally, and then they come before us for discipline. When a pastor's before us who has harmed people, the first question we typically ask them is, who has been impacted by your behavior? What they don't know is how much information we have on the board. We're the recipients of investigative reports and interviews, and so by the time someone comes to us, we've often got a fairly decent grasp already of who's been harmed. But instead of listing out the victims for them, we ask them if they can identify for us who they've harmed and how. Because if we did their homework for them, it'd be pretty difficult to get a read on the authenticity of their contrition. And when you're weighing if someone is safe to care for vulnerable people, that really matters. We're not being dishonest. We're just not playing all of our cards because we're searching for answers to a deeper truth than just a resuscitation of the facts. We already have that. We want to know about their heart. It's a little bit like a parent catching their teenager sneaking home late on a ring cam, but you wait until morning and over breakfast you say, so, is there anything you want to tell me? You're giving the chance to come clean because a contrite heart wants to be honest. It will jump at the chance. Okay, this is a total aside, but I really feel for teens these days. It's so much harder to get away with stuff. The only way I got caught sneaking out as a teenager was when a friend of mine, who was naive enough to do this, wrote about it in their journal. I didn't get caught, they did, but I sure still got grounded. Ugh. It's been over 2 decades and I'm still salty about this. Okay, I digress. Okay, but seriously, who writes that kind of thing down? Okay, for real, back to the sermon. This is sort of how parables work. Jesus isn't hiding the truth in order to make it harder for us to know it or to follow him. He's telling us enough so that we can respond if our heart is earnestly and authentically searching for the truth. As Soren Kierkegaard puts it, parables deceive a person into the truth. Or maybe put another way, they reveal enough of Jesus' truth to reveal the truth about the posture of our hearts. The true message of the kingdom is available to all who will receive it. The seeds were sown even in soil where it was very obviously unlikely to bear fruit. Jesus isn't withholding the truth. He's giving us enough truth to make our own decisions about whether or not we want to follow him. And the way we affirm the truth of the message of the kingdom is by living a life that bears fruit. As one theologian and scholar wrote in response to this text, the only conversions that count in the kingdom are those confirmed by a life of discipleship. So, where does that leave us? The task for us is to pay attention to the soil quality of our own faith. Jesus has a word for each and every one of us. Jesus has placed a calling on your life and wants to partner with you to bear fruit in his kingdom. So the question beneath the question is, do we have ears to hear it? Do we have eyes to see it? Do we have hearts to receive it? It's one thing to read this parable and hold an intellectual understanding of all the theoretical possibilities and outcomes. It's another thing entirely to truly take this in and engage in self-reflection. So I'm curious, as you reflect on the posture of your heart or the soil quality of your faith, which of these 4 examples resonates with you the most? We all want to be known as good soil. Who wouldn't want that? We want fruit, we want the harvest, we want the spiritual success. But if we're honest, if I'm honest, there are times when some of those other soil types describe my life a little more accurately. Times when I'm really enthusiastic for a minute, but then waver when things get tough, or when I get lulled into comfort or complacency. So if that's you today, please hear this. Jesus didn't tell us this story to condemn us, but to wake us up. Though it may be a rude awakening, but sleeping through his greatest invitation, that would be far worse. The purpose of this parable isn't to cause us to wallow in our shortcomings. It's to give us a roadmap of what goes wrong if we don't pay attention so that we're motivated to move. Jesus doesn't just drop a hard word and then walk away. He's the Word made flesh. He both taught and interpreted this parable so that we'd be able to hear it and live it. And please hear this. We don't bear fruit by simply trying harder. We bear fruit by staying closer. The crowd heard the story, but many of them didn't understand it. It was the disciples who walked with Jesus daily, who were entrusted with the true meaning of the message. The crowd, they saw a teacher who taught puzzles, but the disciples were given something much deeper. The difference was the distance. As Jesus said to them, "Blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." The prophets would have given anything to see and hear what the disciples were witnessing that day, and what we have access to whenever we open our Bibles. We have the truth embodied. We have the Word interpreted. We have the Spirit with us right now in this very moment. The soil doesn't work to grow seed. It simply yields to it because it wants to be fruitful. So the question isn't whether or not we're trying hard enough. The question is about the posture of our hearts to the message of the kingdom. True desire will naturally lead to a fruitful harvest. It's the only possible outcome of a genuine and durable faith. So do we have ears to hear? Or more importantly, do we have hearts that want to hear? Amen.